Perfect. So while we're waiting for everyone else to join us today, I've got a short little video about Supply Chain Canada that I'd like to share with everyone. This will only take a minute, so let's get that sharing. There we go, super. So I'll stop sharing this video. All right, and Rishu, if you don't mind just bringing our presentation, putting that on. Okay, so while Richu does that, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today on the topic of greenwashing legislation and impact to supply chains. For those that don't know me, my name is Alan Toe, and I'm the president and CEO of Supply Chain Canada, Canada's largest association for supply chain professionals. We have an incredible lineup of speakers here for our webinar today, starting with Frank McShane. Frank is the principal and founder of Shift Critical International and brings over 20 years of experience from major resource companies. He's not just a strategist, but a professor, an author with deep technical knowledge in sustainability and ESG solutions. So we're very fortunate to have his insights here with us today. I'm also pleased to have Amanda Bangs with us today as well. Amanda is the managing director for Position Green, the leading independent sustainability technology company in the Nordic region. Amanda oversees all of the strategic initiatives across North America and brings a wealth of experience in both supply chain management and ESG. Her unique perspective in sustainability technology is sure to provide valuable takeaways to all of you today. So please join me in welcoming Frank and Amanda to our webinar today. Please note that this webinar will be recorded, and a copy of the presentation deck and link to the recording will be provided to all of you at the end of the event. So typically we send this out the day after, so you'll receive an email tomorrow. We do encourage participation, and so do use the Q&A function in Zoom to post your questions. I'll try to moderate the Q&A board the best I can and direct the questions to our speaker as required. And so where it's appropriate, we'll have the question during the presentation, but we're going to try to push a lot of the questions towards the end of our webinar instead. Okay, so just maybe on to the next slide here, and a quick word about Supply Chain Canada, as we have a number of folks not from our organization here today. We are, Supply Chain Canada, and our purpose is to strengthen Canada's supply chain. And we do this by training and accrediting supply chain professionals, advocating for the profession and best practices, and bringing supply chain issues and opportunities like the one that we're discussing today to the forefront. Today, our sector moves over $1 trillion worth of goods. We contribute over $66 billion to Canada's GDP, and we employ over 900,000 workers across Canada. As a national association operating from coast to coast to coast, our association and its members play a significant role in supporting Canada's economy, elevating our standard of living, and improving Canada's leadership on the global stage. Since we've got such a great crowd, diversity of crowd here today, let's kick things off with a quick poll to see what industries are presented at this webinar today. So, Rishi, if you don't mind bringing up our first icebreaker polling question, the question is, what industry do you work in? And I know I try to fit everything into this poll, but obviously there's big items missing, so we're going to put all of that stuff under a big category of other. So if you want to take a moment and just click on that, and we'll see who's being presented here today. Okay, how does that poll look, Rishu?
So it's energy, mining, and power generation, which is 45%.
Oh, are you able to see the results? Share the results on the screen?
Okay, I'll just end the poll first and then share.
Sure. Okay, fantastic. So we've got a big chunk, 46% from energy, mining, and power generation, followed by looks like the public sector and other. And then we've got folks from construction and manufacturing, with some from financial services, technology, tourism, and one individual from forestry, logging, and agriculture. So that's fantastic. Let's go to the next polling question. And this is around greenwashing. So, have you encountered greenwashing in your industry or market? Yes, frequently. Yes, occasionally. No, you've never actually encountered this, or you're not sure. And it's okay to answer you're not sure as well. So let's run that poll.
Okay, I'll end the poll and share the results.
Wonderful. Interesting. So 45%, I'm not sure. So I think through the course of this webinar today, we're going to give you some common definitions and things to look for as it relates to greenwashing. So hopefully out of this webinar, we're going to address the I'm not sure. And then we see that 40% of the audience has seen a degree of greenwashing within their industry as well. So really, really interesting. I'm going to have our speakers talk to some of what some of these results at their respective spots when they get to their sections. So thank you for that. All right. So maybe, our webinar topic today is greenwashing legislation. And we have a direct impact to that. Like this will have a direct impact to supply chains. And Rishi, maybe just jump to that slide of around definitions. Fantastic. So as we have such a diverse group of participants today, I'd like to share our definition of supply chain management, which really is, it describes a broad range of activities required to plan, control, and execute a product's flow from acquiring the raw material in production through distribution to ultimately to the final customer. So when we talk about supply chain management, it's a management of that full entire life cycle chain. And so the objective there is to make sure that that process is as streamlined and cost effective as possible. We'll go to the next slide here. And so as many of you already know, nailing supply chain management is really key to boosting a company's performance and staying ahead of the competition. When you're in charge of managing third-party costs and services, it's so crucial to get it right if you want to hit your organization's goals. No matter the industry, managing those third-party goods and services is a big deal. So take a look at the illustration to the right, which shows third-party goods and services as a percentage of total expenses, right? You'll see that construction is there, and that can account for anywhere up to 70 to 90% of total expenses. In the energy sector, it accounts for 40 to 75% of total expenses. Supply chain management is a significant lever that can be deployed to achieve organizational objectives. Getting supply chain management isn't just important, it's critical. It can make all the difference when it comes to delivering value to customers, reducing costs, and adapting to market changes. Moreover, effective supply chain management also plays a crucial role in achieving both social and environmental sustainability goals. So I've got a chart here from PRI that depicts the share of environmental impact located in the supply chain across different sectors. So when you look at the chart, it distinguishes between direct impact, which is the light blue, and supply chain impact, which is the dark blue. So, for example, if we look at oil and gas, in oil and gas, we have a direct impact of around 44 to 64%, and a supply chain impact of 35 to 56%. So these sectors have a substantial direct impact due to activities such as extraction, processing, and transportation. And also a significant portion of environmental impact comes from the supply chain, indicating that upstream and downstream activities contribute heavily to the overall footprint. When we look at industries like, let's take a look here, financial services, food and beverage and banking, the direct impact can be only 2%, but we see that the supply chain impact is 98%. So, the direct impact is small, underscoring the critical role of supply chain in sustainability in these industries. But when we look at the indirect, reflecting the extensive range of services and products sourced from various suppliers, there's a significant indirect impact from supply chain management. Now, what's also interesting here too is that as much as we see this, we also see an increasing trend from governments globally to legislate and put in law requirements for companies to manage its supply chains to drive the type of behaviors to meet social and environmental objectives. So this is just an example of a map that depicts some of the global legislation affecting supply chains today. There's a lot more than this, but I just wanted to show here quickly some of the legislation around globally. So to walk us through our learning today, learning journey today, we have Frank, who will provide details on greenwashing and the amendments to the Competition Act. He'll discuss areas of uncertainty, risks, and mitigation activities for you and your organization to consider. As the complexity of managing sustainability risks grow exponentially, Amanda will speak to the possible data solutions that exist today to support organizations in meeting their disclosure requirements and drive sustainability outcomes. I'll then wrap up at the end on training resources available from Supply Chain Canada. Our goal today is to keep you informed and current. So maybe if we go to the next slide there, so these are the three outcomes, right? We want to get you thinking about the implications of the bill, how you can harness technology and your supply chain to support your sustainability effort. And along the way, we'll share strategies to help you and your organization stay ahead of the curve and manage some of today's uncertainty and risk. So with that, I'll now pass the presentation to Frank, who'll provide the details of Bill C-59. So Frank, I'll pass the presentation over to you.
Thanks very much, Alan. Good morning, everyone. Great to be here and great to be partnered with Supply Chain Canada and Alan, and of course, Amanda and Position Green. Straight up front disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer, so none of what I'm about to say constitutes legal advice. Also, I would say that really our end game today is to focus on what to do going forward. Many law firms have eloquently described what the Act does and some of its implications. We want to focus on the future. Next slide, please. I think did you miss a slide there? Yep. Next slide. Yes, so just a brief description of us. So Shift Critical is a sort of boutique sustainability firm. Myself and my good friend and business partner, Craig Stenhouse, started the company almost 2 years ago. And we work in across the spectrum of sustainability issues, from strategy right through to very focused in the last year on modern slavery, and now and risk assessment, and now more focused on some of the other issues, including the amendments to the Competition Act. So next slide. Thank you. So greenwashing. So this slide just, you know, a sort of flash of some of the things that are involved in greenwashing, and some of the kinds of terminology that you'll see. And the principle is that environmental and social claims must be backed up by action that generates the benefits claimed in a statement or a claim. If the benefits claimed are not there, then it's deception. So the amendment to the Act covers all forms of deception, but of course there's a spectrum, claiming to be more environmentally friendly, green, clean, sustainable, eco-friendly, bio-friendly, earth-friendly, without any justification or support. But there are different kind of varieties of this. Just to name a couple of examples, you'll see along the top there, I've highlighted some things. Green lighting, drawing attention to one thing, one feature, while concealing information about other impacts. And I think it's on the government website. It may be on the one for C15, I can't remember now, but they draw attention to bamboo sheets, where it was really emphasized that bamboo sheets, you know, they're natural, they're in harmony with the environment. But what it doesn't say is the intense chemical processes that it takes to convert bamboo into a fiber so that you can make sheets out of it. And that remained hidden. And so that's been highlighted. Green crowding, another example, hiding behind slow-moving initiatives while doing nothing and lobbying against environmental legislation. Green shifting, that's moving the onus to consumers to buy sustainable products. And we'll see more of, I'll bring up another example of that in a moment. So next slide, please. Now with this one, I think the the lines, you'll have to hit the enter button again and you'll see some text comes in. Ah, it all came in at once. Okay, good. So just some examples. Volkswagen, this is probably the most infamous one, you know, claimed to have the lowest emissions combustion engine vehicles on the market. The US EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, when they assessed these cars, found that they produced up to 40 times the emissions claimed. And I love that poster there. We're sorry that we got caught. That was one that was flying around in Europe for a while. Volkswagen claimed they'd misunderstood the testing requirements, but that didn't land very well. And of course, there's been lots of fallout for Volkswagen from that scenario. Shell in the Netherlands, several actions by impact shareholders and others, claiming that their portfolio does not align with their claim to be moving towards global net zero. And you know, their vague plans for carbon emissions reduction. Two other examples: coffee, Keurig and Nespresso. You know, they say their pods are recyclable, but what they weren't saying was that the recycling only happens at specialized centers with non-standard equipment. And Keurig were in fact sued for false advertising. Nespresso subsequently started its recycling program, but put the onus on consumers to do the right thing. And this is, you know, another form of greenwashing. And last example there, Red Lobster, suppliers found guilty of, they have a sustainable fisheries certificate, but they were found guilty of endangering North Atlantic right whales in violation of the Endangered Species Act by a US district court, and they lost their sustainable fisheries certificate. So one thing that all of these claims have in common: lack of evidence, false data, lack of full disclosure, and disproportionately pumping one environmental benefit while concealing environmental disbenefits. And there are other things that they have in common as well. So next slide. So the Competition Act, as I say, the lawyers have very eloquently described this. What the amendments to the Competition Act involve, I'll try and be brief. So the Competition Act itself And I should say here that Bill C-59 was an omnibus act that had changes to the Competition Act embedded in it. So the greenwashing part is all in relation to the Competition Act. C-59 is actually much broader. So the Competition Act is designed to maintain and encourage competition in Canada in order to promote the efficiency and adaptability of the Canadian economy. It also talks about making a fair playing field for small and medium-sized businesses, foreign competition, exposing Canadians to competitive pricing and product choices, etc. The problem with the Act, or in general, the Act, it covers a very wide range of public documents. I'll talk more about that in a moment. Any company, it covers any company making claims in Canada. Past claims may be regarded as current if publicly accessible. There must be an adequate test and methodology. I'll talk more about that. It extends access to private citizens. This didn't exist before. A private citizen couldn't bring a claim of this kind against a company. Now they can. And it sets a very low bar in terms of claims or requests for reviews, rather, by the Competition Bureau have to be in the public interest, but most legal minds regard this as a very low bar. The other thing about it, it has large fines for directors and officers. And I won't go into all of the penalties that one can incur, but the one that catches everybody's attention is a potential for 3% in extreme circumstances, 3% of global gross revenues. So, of course, this has caused an outcry for more guidance and public consultation because the Act is regarded to be very vague in some areas. So as Alan has already said, Canada is not the only jurisdiction trying to establish that has established anti-greenwashing legislation. It's also not the only piece of legislation of this type. There are a couple that that impact the oil and gas industry in particular. Next slide. So what's been the response of industry? Well, I think everybody is aware, you know, it's been all over the media. Pathways Consortium withdrew website content, was replaced with a post detailing concerns about Bill C-59. Many companies have put up disclaimers saying that historical information is for information purposes only. And one statement that I read, I thought captured the situation quite well, or the response of industry. It said, being subject to an ambiguous, undefined standard makes it difficult to make certain statements because there is no clear definition against which to measure accuracy. So all that to say, there's been an abundance of caution, and some have suggested, for example, moving recordings of all events behind a paywall so that they're not in fact public. And we saw a situation on LinkedIn yesterday where our good friend Bill Whitelaw talked about having having someone from a company withdraw from presenting to an audience at a presentation because they were concerned about the implications of making public statements around sustainability. However, on the other side of the coin, we should also note that pulling information may be regarded as a failure to disclose. And as we're looking down the road at mandatory sustainability reporting, this failure to disclose to investors may create a whole different set of challenges for companies. So next slide. So some of the things covered, public-facing statements and claims. I won't go through all of these, but the areas, you know, it could involve environment, social governance, modern slavery, strategy, and I should go back. Can we go back a few slides? I did miss something that I wanted to say to qualify. Keep that one there. So sorry, the next slide. What I wanted to say was, you know, the amendments to the Competition Act, they say that you can't have a product and claim environmental, social, other benefits unless they have been qualified by an adequate and proper test. And you can't have, for example, a strategy or a plan that makes certain claims going forward into the future without substantiation in accordance with an internationally recognized methodology. Sorry, I forgot to mention that on that slide. So if we go forward, because it qualifies everything else that I'm about to say. So if we look at this slide, you know, environment, low carbon fuels, statements about carbon emissions, statements about the cleaner implications of LNG production. On the social side, claims about Indigenous reconciliation, governance, claims about degree of oversight that boards provide. For example, in modern slavery, statements about risk assessment, low or no risk, and then strategy. So at a high level, the concerns are the broad coverage of the Act. There are new concepts. It's effective immediately. The penalties are large. The burden of proof resides entirely with the company, not the partner, the party making the claim. And there is a general sense that activist agendas will seek to maximize harm to companies that are on their radar screen. And finally, you know, if a review of a claim goes to court for contravention of the Act, any guidance issued by the Competition Bureau with respect to things is non-binding. And ultimately, if it ends up in court, a judge is deciding on these things. And that's a whole set of other issues. So next slide, please. So, of course, companies rightly perceive that there is risk here. I won't go through all the quantums of risk associated with this, but reputationally, it can be damaging. Financially, if companies are pulling statements, investors may be unsure of where to allocate capital. Customers are discouraged by an entity's association with greenwashing. This can lead to capital flight, brand value erosion, and of course, the elevation of competitor brands. And there's legal risk when private citizens are able to bring claims for review of these sorts of statements. Next slide. So I'll be very quick on this one. So at a broad level, the scope of the Act is under question. The definitions, what constitutes a methodology, the competency of the Competition Bureau to actually manage overseeing these reviews. I mean, who at the Competition Bureau is going to oversee a review of, you know, your net zero by 2050 plan, etc. And of course, the big question for companies is resourcing. There's lots of duplication and overlap with other regulations, and companies are not sure how it will play out in practice. I've only highlighted some of the uncertainties here. There are many others. Next slide, please. So one of the things is you can't have a product and claim environmental and other benefits without a proper test. So what does that involve? Well, we've got some indication already. You have to do some kind of test for the product prior to the claim being made. It must be under controlled circumstances. It must be objective. And these are fundamental kind of science-based criteria. Objective and appropriate to supporting the claim being made. And ultimately, it must be realistic. It must reflect what the product, the test must reflect results that would be equal to what the product does in the real world. And it must reflect the intended use of the product. And we look at the Volkswagen example, and clearly, you know, that wasn't what was happening in the real world. Under their test conditions, they've created a completely false environment. So next slide, please. The other big question is on methodologies. I've got a list of methodologies there. I'm not going to talk to those specifically because Amanda will address those. I'm going to talk to general principles. And although we haven't got clarity through guidance from government yet or the Competition Bureau on what constitutes an internationally recognized methodology, there are again some principles that we can apply. It must be grounded in science. It must provide objective measures for assessing relevant data. It must be consistent and using widely accepted norms. It must be derived, and this is my addition to on the research I've done around this. My addition is it preferably derived from multi-stakeholder input by experts. It should be recognized internationally. That is, it's used by more than one country, preferably numerous countries and numerous organizations. The methodology must be reproducible. It must be consistent. It must be documented, independently verified, and above all, transparent. It must be accessible to people. The basis of the methodology should be clear and well communicated. even when we do all of those things, we don't eliminate the uncertainty because, for example, what happens if you have two methodologies and you use one and an NGO or some other interested party comes and says, hey, we think you should have used methodology X to substantiate this claim, and you go, but I use methodology Y. Well, that's not good enough. We wanted this. So there's still tons of area for uncertainty and a need for clarification. Next slide, please. So Alan is always educating us to think about how supply chains view the world, because it is different to the way in which sometimes in which large companies and client companies view the world. And so what are the implications, the potential implications of this for supply chain and suppliers? Well, we can anticipate increased scrutiny and expectations, but also opportunity. Suppliers will probably require a greater understanding of what the client's sustainability profile is. There may be greater monitoring as client companies rely more on suppliers to help them meet their sustainability goals. On the other hand, you know, I'm talking as if everything was negative. Some observers see this leading to a rebalancing of information in the public domain and moving away from hyperbole to actionable commitments. Next slide. I'm going to skip over this slide because I was going to talk a little bit about transition planning, particularly with respect to climate change, as a response to the amendments in the Act. But there's plenty of information in the public domain, and others have talked about this. We're tight for time. I'm going to skip this one. So, call to action. Where do we end up? Claims and statements of the nature that are targeted by the amendments, they do have a purpose. So it's not likely that the Competition Bureau is trying to eliminate them completely. The first thing that companies need to do, of course, is look after the legal risk, review all public-facing qualitative, quantitative data claims statements. But the call to action going forward is look at these claims and statements and apply the same rigor to supporting them as you would to financial disclosures. That means using robust processes and systems, get board and senior executive buy-in and oversight. Generate data that you can be confident in with investors and stakeholders. Check accuracy of everything, particularly triggering terms like, you know, I'll be facetious and say lean and green. Test and prove before making a claim, and avoid vague comparisons. They're the death of any claim, you know, vagueness, a lack of specificity. And where appropriate, have any actions, claims, statements assured, certified, verified. There are many certifying organizations out there. And what is appropriate depends on the scale of your organization. Overall, and finally, avoid creating unrealistic impressions. Only state the true environmental, social, governance benefits of the things that you do and the claims that you're making. And ultimately, you require, as all of this tsunami of new regulation comes at companies and suppliers and supply chain, you require excellent data management. And that's a great segue to hand over to Amanda, who's going to talk you through what that looks like. Thank you.
Maybe before we jump there, Frank, we've got another polling question for the audience, and Rishi, let's put that polling question up. And based on what Frank has shared with all of you today, let's get that polling question up. The question is going to be around your confidence, right? And so, how confident are you in your organization's ability to assess sustainability risks accurately? Are you very confident, somewhat confident, not very confident, or not confident at all? So let's give a few seconds here for folks to answer that. Okay, how do the results look, Vishu? Okay, so we've got most of the folks sitting around that somewhat confident and not very confident. So, and I don't think the response here would surprise any of the presenter at all. And I think I'm going to take that and we'll address it at the back end around how do we create greater confidence. And some of that relates back to what Frank is saying, just the level of uncertainty and lack of definition as well. Amanda, at this point, we'll pass the presentation to you to talk about Position Green and some of the technology available to support organizations.
That sounds great. Thanks so much, Alan, and thanks, Frank, for the excellent setup. And I must say, bringing it back personally, I was one of those consumers thinking my Nespresso pods were being recycled. So definitely not pleased to
Me
learn
too.
based on the number of Nespresso pods I drink on a current basis. But really nice to be here with you all. I'm a former supply chain consultant turned ESG platform and data collection enthusiast. So super exciting to be here and presenting on this topic. Wanted to share a little bit about Position Green in case you all had not heard of our company before. We are a pure play sustainability platform and advisory services company. We were founded in 2015 and really built out in the Nordics. I think it's really important to share that, given that, as you can imagine, greenwashing and regulatory reporting around ESG is not something new to the European markets. They're always leading the way in this area, and I think now that Position Green is over here in North America, we really have an opportunity to take advantage of those lessons learned and the tools and advisory that have been built out to meet European reporting needs, and we're in a great position to benefit from that. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you. Bottom line, stakeholders are looking for more transparency, particularly as it relates to supply chain. I can say, from my earlier days as a supply chain consultant, looking at category management and sourcing procurement, sustainability was absolutely not a topic on the table, and now it certainly is. In order to have a credible sustainability strategy as a company, supply chain is definitely top of the agenda. As Alan showed in that graphic earlier, there's a really good portion of impact environmentally and also social and governance that's really being driven from supply chains. And so it's an exciting time to be a supply chain professional with this challenge. And to just give you an idea of how much the space is growing and how much of a focus this is for companies, there was a recent Verdantix supply chain sustainability software study that came out that said this market is expected to grow from $1.7 billion to $7 billion in 2029, and that supply chain transparency is one of the top two priorities on the desk of most companies when it relates to sustainability. So it's really the next frontier. From an expectation perspective, we're going from having transparency on your own direct operations to really looking down the value chain. And with that being said, let's move ahead to our polling question. As I go forward on best practices for data collection management, would love to understand from the audience where you are today in terms of ESG data collection from your supply chain. And I think we've got a polling question coming up on this.
All right, let's bring that last polling question up. Wonderful.
Great.
So, go ahead, Amanda.
I was just going to say, options are, I know you all can read, but no ESG data collected whatsoever today. Data collected in spreadsheets. We love an Excel spreadsheet. That's a great starting point. Data collected in some sort of centralized platform, and then kind of next level, it's in a centralized platform with analytics and engagement on improvement opportunities. Great. Maybe we can go ahead and reveal the results. Yep, this is pretty much what I expected. I think this is just showing that many companies, not just the audience here, is really early on in this, and there's a tremendous opportunity to go up the maturity scale in this type of reporting and data collection. And I'm here to tell you that as far as greenwashing goes, I'm a former athlete, so I would just say best defense is offense. And that's why platforms like Position Green exist, to make sure that your company is really set up with a defensible ESG data strategy that you can stand behind, that is really aligned with international standards. And maybe we can progress to the next slides here, because I want to make sure we get through and have some more time for questions. Great. So just talking, taking a step back and talking about best practices for data collection as far as supply chain goes within ESG. This is kind of an academic overview and maybe obvious, but it's important to make sure the data is balanced. We know we're not going to get perfect data for sure. And so being clear on here's what we've got, here's where we have gaps, comparable data being collected. We want to make sure that there's consistent definitions of the data points being gathered and in alignment with those international standards. As we said, there's still some ambiguity on this new law and exactly which ones will be used as that standard. But I think you should definitely be looking to where Europe and other regulations have pointed us towards. And then lastly, contextualized. This data doesn't exist in a vacuum. It needs to be contextualized with the growth of the company, the complexity of the supply chain. All these things are really important to keep in mind. Now, if we go to the next slide, driving sustainability transformation, it really requires tech innovation to ensure that you're able to effectively have a data management strategy as outlined in the prior slide. And I'd love to walk through some of the things you should keep in mind when considering potentially moving off spreadsheets or maybe going from no data collection to a really robust strategy. So we'll advance to the next slide. Great. A lot of information on the page. I'll try to go over this quickly. When looking at supply chain ESG data collection, reporting software platforms, here's what I would keep in mind. Number one, ensuring that whoever you pick is comprehensive in the types of ESG data you can collect from your supply chains. It's certainly not just environmental. There's human rights, there's governance. There's a number of different types of ESG data points that you're going to want to collect, and it may change over time. You may want to start with environmental and carbon and expand to other relevant and material topics. But we want to make sure that you have a platform that can really grow and change with you depending on new regulations that may come up or other topics that become material. So full ESG spectrum is important, and also the ability to go beyond your tier 1 suppliers and really have a lot of depth in your strategy. Number two, audit readiness. This is something that Position Green was really built around. Our founder came from Deloitte, from the financials space, and thought, it's really important to have that same audit trail with your non-financial data within ESG as you do with your financial data. So let's make sure what we're collecting is very defensible. Are there checks and balances to ensure accuracy of the data that's coming in from your suppliers? Guardrails that say, hey, this doesn't look quite right. Let's make sure that you get it within the bounds of some standard deviation. Uploading any sort of documentation to support those responses, and transparency, basically an audit trail. Who submitted this data point when? And then lastly, I feel like we've just beaten this point home, but really aligned with the standards and regulations that already exist, so that you can say, yes, I collected this data and I did it in a very consistent way aligned with international standards. And I'm not going to go through all of these in detail given our time constraints here, but we know the ISO standard is one that's certainly been raised quite a bit when it related to our green claims. And this is all the logos and kind of regulations and standards here are ones that Position Green supports. Go to the next slide. Great. So leading edge supplier management with Position Green. I have to pitch us here a little bit and just share, how proud I am that we're kind of leading the next frontier of supply chain data collection. And I will say Position Green goes much broader than just supply chain assessments. We have a full sustainability reporting suite and also have a sustainable investment suite. But supplier assessment is one piece of our offering. And of course, the most relevant to this audience here today, would say in addition to those three basics that you want to make sure you're hitting in the slide before, some things that are really interesting that I would consider, which are more part of the mature side of that answer spectrum that I asked up front, is not just data collection as a one-time data point and one direction of communication, but really interactive, understanding, with the data that we're getting from our suppliers, let's score that, let's benchmark it, let's contextualize, what does this mean? Setting maybe either corrective action plans, or maybe it's just goals. We'd love for you all to set a net zero target. Let's set some timelines to that and have a dialogue. And then last 2 points here, AI, it's a topic that of course is coming up a lot in many contexts. It's something we're really proud of the way that we're leveraging that at Position Green. We have, it's called an AI analyst, who can take all the inputs that you're receiving and make some sense of it. You can ask questions, who are my underperforming suppliers on these metrics? And it'll pull out the insights, which is really critical when you've got a lean team and you really need that data centralized, and you can get those insights quickly. And lastly, the ability to integrate via other systems. It's really hard to get this information all together manually. If you have systems that make it easier, find a platform that can connect in with those ERPs like ours does. Great. I'm gonna pause for there, I guess, because I know we've got other pieces to get to. I want to get some questions too, but I'll hand it off to you, Alan, to share some.
Wonderful. Amanda, thank you so much for that. Maybe at this point, Rishu, if you can just turn off the share screen, and we'll address some of the questions from the audience. And I've got one myself, or maybe a few for our presenters. Lots of familiar faces out there, or names out there. Great to see Chris, Danielle, Gary, all of them, people that I know out in the audience today. So Chris writes, so why do you think that there's been a disparity of reactions between industrial sectors? You don't see the same risk-off approach from mining, example like tech and BHP, or ag, example of Nutrien, financial services, or textile, all of which have maintained their sustainability disclosure. So why do you, first, I guess the question is there actually a disparity of reaction? Do you agree with that assessment? And if you do, why is that? Why is there a disparity of reaction? Oh, Frank, you're on mute.
Yeah. Would you like me to take that one first?
Go for it,
Yeah, I do think there has been a disparity of action, and I think it stems partly from the fact that everything we're hearing from people that we talk to here in Calgary specifically is that the industry felt in some ways that the act was directly targeting the oil and gas sector as a way to target production. I also think there are other factors involved. I think if you look, for example, at the mining sector, if we're talking about resource sectors, if you look at mining, mining walked through, the hotbed of coals kind of a couple of decades ago, and I was involved with the Mining Minerals Sustainable Development Project. But mining had come under intense scrutiny years ago, and oil and gas and other resource industries, maybe to a lesser extent. I don't know if you worked in forestry, you could argue that what was happening in the West Coast a couple of decades or more ago was pretty intense. But the mining sector really took a lot of trouble to get its house in order with a good, solid, associations and setting standards. And so I think they might have been less concerned than some of the other resource sectors. Now, it's a varying opinion whether you think oil and gas or mining is more advanced in terms of substantiating the claims that they make. And I think that's yet to be decided, because we'll see what happens when private citizens actually have access to start asking for reviews of claims.
Thank you, Frank. Amanda, do you have anything to add to the question?
No, nothing to add to that. Great job, Frank. I think you covered it well.
Okay, we've got another question from Enrique, and this is around such claims and accusations. So, what are the criteria to establish that a claim accusation is reasonable, according to the private right of access to the Competition Bureau, so that they can conduct investigation on such matters. Frank, any guidelines on this today?
Yeah, again, to be decided because we haven't had any of these up till now. So, but there are some things that I guess you can think about. You know, the challenges will come against deceptive marketing practices and claims. And you know, we already have some criteria. You know, a product must have a proper test. A business activity must have a proper methodology. And so when these reviews are assessed, as I understand it, it will be looking at, okay, what is actually said? What is the specific meaning of what's said? And above that, what is the general impression that the claimant is making? So if a private citizen were to amass a series of questions around those criteria, then they would have a good, and the other one is, you know, showing that any review of a claim or a statement is in the public interest. But I've already said we think the bar is fairly low there. As long as, you know, at the moment, they're the fundamental criteria which apply to someone, a private citizen, being able to approach the Competition Bureau with a claim.
Thanks, Frank. Another question from Enrique, and I think this speaks to a lot of the anxiety that our members are seeing today. So as we saw through that polling, right, many companies are not even collecting data today, and if they are, they're collecting it in spreadsheets. So the big question is, so for those companies that aren't even collecting data today, it's quite daunting. So what do they really need to gather? How do they start on this journey? Amanda, maybe I'll direct this question to you.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think what we really want to avoid is asking questions of suppliers just to have more data and just starting somewhere. I think it's important to be thoughtful and have that discussion and stakeholder alignment behind what is going to be a material piece of information to get from your suppliers. It really varies depending on what industry you're in, where you should really be focusing, whether it's more environmental, maybe it's more focused on human rights risks that may be within your supply chain, and maybe it's both. And I would say if you don't have the resources internally to get started on that evaluation of the appropriate data points to be collecting, that's why advisors are here to kind of to get folks started with a strategy, get that infrastructure in place, and then we scale up with you and perhaps embed that knowledge as you grow that team and as you grow in that journey. But have enough of a direction to get started, start small and scale, but you want to make sure that it's decision useful and is going to be a real part of your storytelling and your sustainability journey, and not just asking a couple questions, just ask a couple questions, but to be thoughtful about it and decision useful.
Wonderful, Amanda. And maybe just to add quickly to that too, use the industry associations as another source area as well, and connect in with peer companies and industry groups and associations, and do stay closely connected with government, and in particular when they're seeking feedback and input as well. So another area. Frank, did you have anything else to add to that response?
Just very briefly, I think for some small and medium-sized companies and suppliers in particular, the prospect of all this may be overwhelming, because you may be under greater scrutiny. You may be asked for more things by your client companies, etc. And the anticipation is not that small and medium companies will necessarily be able to do the whole spectrum of things that a large client company can do. But, you know, what you do need to do is understand the expectations of your clients. So that's where the communication and the engagement becomes very important. And hopefully you can foster a relationship with your client company that says, you know, you can turn around and ask them, what are the expectations with respect to A, B, and C? and then you at least clarify so that you know what your obligations are.
Thank you, Frank. We're starting to get to the end of our session here. Maybe we'll take one final question from the audience. Phil, you've raised your hand. Did you want to maybe post your question? Just come off mute there and ask your question. And while he's doing that, Rishi, we can put up my last slide there on additional resources. Actually, is Phil able to ask the question? And if he's not there, maybe we'll go to Sarah. Sarah, if you're not able to ask your question, feel free to send me an email or post your question on here, and we'll get to it upon when we send out the link and the presentation deck to everyone as well. Maybe the last question is, so how accurate and dedicated do companies have to be at the beginning to implement a full internal program for that matter? Like how just the degree of accuracy that's required. Can you give some guidance around that, both Amanda and Frank?
Go ahead, Amanda.
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on the way the question is positioned. I think the accuracy really comes in how this data point is positioned or questioned, and kind of giving guidance along the way actually doesn't necessarily sit in your organization. If you've got a tool or software and something that it's very clearly laid out, and you have those checks where it's easier to ensure that that accuracy is there. It takes the onus off of the team because there's already a tool there to help you along, and takes the burden off you all to be digging in on some of that, especially if you're really resource constrained. But really curious to hear Frank's thoughts on that as well.
No, I mean, no, that's absolutely right. It's a it's a question of marshaling your resources and ensuring, understanding what the demands are. Firstly, you can't be great at everything, and so you've got to target your resources where they're most meaningful.
Super. Hey, as we're out of time already, and it's gone by so fast. So as we come to the close of our webinar, I'd like to thank both Frank and Amanda for their presentation and insights today. I also want to thank all of you for taking the time to learn more about greenwashing and its impact to supply chains. As a nonprofit association working to advance supply chain in Canada, we're here to help you stay current and provide organizations with the support to address today's many complex supply chain issues. So we have various products out there right now around S211 training for individuals and for enterprise-wide organizations. We've got the upcoming conference on October 1st, of which we're going to spend a significant portion of time talking about sustainability risk and Indigenous business development, and so on and so forth as well. So we'll continue to bring forward impactful webinars and training in the future, and we hope to see you all at future events. Thank you everyone for attending, and we look forward to seeing you in the future. And again, we'll be sending out a copy of the presentation deck, the link to this video, and then we're going to also take advantage to answer any of the questions that we weren't able to answer at today's webinar. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and I will talk to all of you soon. Bye for now.